Right, the broadcast has started. Now hand over to Councillor Phil Harris.
Hello, for those listening and watching our meeting, I'm Councillor Phil Harris and I'm Chair of the Performance and Overview Committee, which is now acting as closure of Accounts Committee in order to consider the draft statements of accounts. And I will take us through the agenda. Item 1A, recording of the meeting. The meeting is being recorded, members are reminded of that. Item 1B, apologies for absence. We did a roll call just before the meeting started. Can officers please confirm attendance at the meeting?
Yes, we can confirm that all members of the committee are in attendance, and in addition, Derek Barnett, the non-elected independent member, is also in attendance.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 1C, declaration of members' interests. Can members please indicate whether they have any declarations of interest to make in respect of any items on the agenda, and have any members indicated that they wish to speak?
No, they haven't.
Okay. Moving on to item 2, the draft statement of accounts 2019-20, pages 1 to 88. Alan Rainford and Wendy Bevington will take us through this item. Alan, I believe you're going to begin and then hand over to Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and good morning, members. I will give an overview of the accounts and then pass to Wendy to go through the detail. I'm Alan Rainford, I'm the Treasurer of the Fire Authority. So the item before you today is the unaudited statement of accounts for the 2019-20 financial year. Normally, you would have received the unaudited statement of accounts by the 31st of May and would have been considering before the end of July the audited accounts with the auditor's opinion. However, because of the challenges presented by the pandemic, the government has changed what are called the accounts and audit regulations and has provided local authorities with additional time for the approval of the unaudited accounts and the publication of the audited accounts. The deadline for the publication for the audited accounts with the auditor's opinion has been pushed back to the 30th of November. Even with these relaxed deadlines, more generous deadlines, it has been a challenge to produce the accounts given the extensive remote working. So I would like to thank Wendy and the finance team for their work in producing the accounts. In the past, I've drawn members' attention to areas where the statements have very different figures from those that appear in the budget. So some of the figures that members may recognise from the budget may be very different in the statement of accounts. And I will just highlight a couple of areas where that is the case. At the Fire Authority meeting on the 1st of July, members considered the end of year financial position report, which indicated that there was a revenue underspend at the end of the year of 613,000. So in other words, we kept spending within budget in the year and had £613,000 left over. If you look at the income and expenditure statements of the accounts, which are on page 19, you will see at the foot of the right-hand table a figure of 68,568. So that's suggesting that we are in credit at the end of the year to the tune of 68 million. This is clearly a very different figure to the 613,000 that we had at the end of the financial year, as shown in the report that was considered on the 1st of July. The important point to bear in mind is that the income and expenditure statement shows the accounting cost of providing services in the year. And the accounting costs in some areas are very different to the cost that we put in the revenue budget. There are specific accounting rules and accounting practices that we have to follow, particularly in relation to the use of assets and to the valuation of pension liabilities. And those are the two areas that make a significant difference and result in the figures that you see in the income and expenditure figure there. We don't have a surplus of 68 million that we can use in providing services in the future. That is very much an accounting figure. The other main statement in the accounts is the balance sheet, which is on page 22. And there are two figures there towards the bottom of the right-hand column that I just want to mention. The first figure, which is the usable reserve figure, 21,542, that is the same figure that was included in the report that went to the Fire Authority on the 1st of July. So those are reserves that we can use in providing services in the future. The figure below it, the figure of 447 million, that is very much, again, an accounting entry. It ensures that the balance sheet remains in balance. It isn't a sum of money that we have and that we can use to support services in the future. So I just wanted to make those two broad points just to illustrate that the figures in the accounts are often very different from the figures that we see in the budget. What I'll do now is I'll hand over to Wendy, who will take you through some of the detail.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. My name is Wendy Bevington. I'm your Head of Finance and also Deputy Section 151 Officer. And I'm going to take you through the accounts in a little bit more detail so that you can understand some of the key points that are made within this year. First of all, I would just like to reiterate what Alan said about these accounts. The accounts themselves are created and prepared under the International Financial Reporting Standard rules and the Code of Practice. These are numerous detailed legal statements that we have to follow, which means that we have a complex set of accounts, but we can guarantee that they are comparable with anybody else's sets of accounts because we all comply with these rules. These accounts represent the financial picture of the year, and financial here does not mean cash in all cases. And I'll explain that as we go through the actual statements. But first, I would like to take you through the narrative, which starts on page 3 of the report. The narrative is a part of the accounts where we can try and tell the story in easier or more user-friendly language so that the readers can be prepared for what follows. And in terms of that, we have highlighted some of the things that we have succeeded with in the previous year, including the change to our core values, in terms of what our financial performance has been, which Alan's just mentioned, and also some of the other operational things we've agreed in terms of investments and production of operational things during the year, such as the Beechmere support fire. So those are all sorts of things that we are trying to get over to the public that these accounts have actually supported. But there are a couple of things that we need to raise for you that are specific to this set of accounts. And it starts at section 5 on page 11, and it's in relation to the pension liability. Members will be aware that there was a move some time ago to a different type of pension using career averages and different contribution rates. And the move from one pension scheme to another involved some transitional arrangement for a cohort of people who were on the cusp of one scheme to the other. There was a challenge through the courts through a particular case called MacLeod and Sargent, and the courts found in favour that the transitional arrangements were not appropriate and they were age discriminatory. And at the moment there is a full review going on as to how remedy is going to be put in place to take account of this legal finding. This week, 2 consultations have been issued in relation to the unfunded pension schemes, including the firefighters, and the funded pension schemes, which are for the staff through the local government pension schemes. And those consultations are now live until the autumn, and the hope of the Treasury is that at the end of those consultations, a remedy can be agreed upon and likely to be actioned no earlier than next year. But of course, we include in these accounts pension liabilities, and therefore we needed to ensure that the actuaries took into account pension liabilities. And I will demonstrate that as we go through the primary statements. Moving on to section 8 of the narrative, which starts halfway down page 13, we cannot avoid talking about the coronavirus pandemic. This has had an impact not only on the outturn of last year, but an ongoing impact on this year. But the two sort of areas I really want to emphasize on this is the fact that we produce these accounts on something called a going concern basis. That means we believe that the fire authority will exist into the foreseeable future, and therefore we can prepare the accounts on that basis. Coronavirus has come at a cost, and we are incurring specific costs. However, unlike other parts of the public sector, the fire service have received direct grants from government to support the cost of COVID. And at the moment, we are still within the funding that has been provided to us to cover the costs as recorded. So under those circumstances, COVID does not have any direct impact on us being able to continue for the foreseeable future as a going concern. The other thing COVID has done, in line with, as Alan has said, delayed the need for us to publish our draft accounts, which is now the 31st of July rather than the 31st of May, and the audited accounts by the end of November rather than September. But they also went one step further, and they also deferred the revised International Financial Reporting Standard 16 in relation to leases. This was a reporting standard that would mean that anything that we lease, we would have to record as an asset on the balance sheet. That's not now in these accounts, but it will be in the accounts this time next year. The last thing I would like to say about COVID is part of our funding comes from business rates. And we recognise at the end of each year the impact of business rates and council tax within the collection funds. That's the money that the 4 local authorities hold, for which we are entitled to a share, either of the surplus or deficit. There is a year-end return that business rates have to do through the local authorities. Normally that would be completed by the 31st of May, and we would be able to take this into account in these draft accounts. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, if you're having to complete these have been delayed to the 31st of July this year. So of course we are operating on the draft of those returns and not the final returns. Should there be any material changes to those returns, they will be reflected in the final accounts we present in September. So that's all I really wanted to say in terms of the narrative. If we can then move on to some more detail and turn to page 17, which is the expenditure and funding analysis note. This note is designed to try and explain, as Alan was referring to, the difference between what we actually charge to cash and what we put in to our budget and what we have to report in terms of accounting. In terms of the changes and adjustments we make between the funding and accounting basis, which is the second to last column with a bottom figure of 2381, I would like to take people to page 44, which is note 6, because I think this will hopefully explain to members and anybody watching what those particular items are. So in terms of the adjustments, we start off with adjustments for capital purposes, and the note explains this contains depreciation, impairment and revaluation gains and losses, and any changes for asset disposals. What we're trying to recognise here is that we own assets, we're fully paid for, and what we're recording here is a hypothecated cost of using those assets in the year. That's depreciation. The big figures that generally make a fundamental difference are the pension adjustments. We have to value and report on our pension liability in the balance sheet and in the accounts, and any movements between that liability from one year to the next. The liability is not payable in one lump sum. It will be paid over the life of our current pensioners and our pensioners to be who are currently working in our organisation. So although it's a big figure and there are big swings based on a lot of clever calculations that the actuaries do in terms of payments into the scheme from employers and employees, estimates of increases in salary, estimates of increase in inflation, the number of pensioners we have, how much of the pension they will take in lump sum, how much they will take in pension, but also how long they will take that pension for. All of these factors are taken into account and adjusted each year, and the changes to the pensions are reported in that way. The final small amounts in other differences relate to outstanding employee leave, in other words, carry forward of annual leave that hasn't been taken in year but will be taken in the following year. We put a pound sign against it. It doesn't mean we pay those unless there is unusual circumstances such as somebody leave and we give pay in lieu of notice, but generally speaking it is taken in the following year. So I just wanted to explain that in a little detail to say that there are an awful lot of things within these accounts that are financially represented but do not actually represent cash. If we then go back to the CIES, which Alan referred to, which is on page, bear with me, 19. This is put in the order of firefighting, rescue operations, protection, prevention, support services, etc. We try and enhance this for readers who may not necessarily always understand what that means. In note 7 on page 45, which is a subjective analysis, which explains in terms of what we've actually spent the money on rather than where we've spent it. And it also clearly shows that included within the counts are the Northwest Fire Control and our share of the Northwest Fire Control costs and assets and liabilities. So if we then move on to the next page, which is page 20, and we have the movement in reserves statement. As Alan stated, there are two types of reserves, usable and unusable. The unusable reserves cover the pensions, the revaluation, the collection fund, the accumulated absences and the capital adjustment account. These represent the opposite side or understanding of what we have already invested in terms of land and buildings from the capital adjustment account and the pension reserve. They are not available for use, they are purely for accounting purposes. The ones which we need to perhaps put more focus on are the usable reserves. And if you look in the middle of the page at the top, balance at the 1st of April 2019, usable reserves stood at just over 31 million. Because of our investments and capital programme and the progress we've successfully made during the last year, we have used some of those reserves, and at the bottom of that centre column, you will see that we now have just over £21.5 million in reserves. So we have actually utilised reserves as we planned during this financial year. If we then move on to the balance sheet, which my system has just collapsed for me and not responding. There are two issues on the balance sheet that I wanted to draw members' attention to. It's back, thankfully. Thank you very much. Technology's grand when it works. Is in terms of our long-term assets, you will see we have assets under construction, and at the moment that stands at 10 million. Included in the assets under construction, of course, are Chester Fire Station, the training station here at Sadler Road, and a small amount in relation to Crewe, which has now commenced. So that indicates the investments we have made during the year in terms of our capital programme. There is another particular item that is new on this year's balance sheet, and that's assets held for sale, which is slightly further down, of £875,000. That relates to 5 firehouses which are currently actively being marketed, one of which has now been sold. In terms of the final bit in terms of cash flow, which is on page 23, note 22 on page 61 takes you through the details of those. And I don't think there is any further need of referring to that. One of the things now in terms of looking at the notes that are often of interest to members as well as members of the public is on page 63, which is the officer's remuneration. And that is a standard note that we have to include, and it's just highlighting that that is part and parcel of our requirements to be open and transparent. In terms of the other things I wanted to point out is on page 65, which we have a list of all our grant income. And you will see that included this year is the first tranche of money we got for COVID-19 of £167,000, just to be clear. Finally, I just want to point out on page 78 that there is a contingent liability that remains. It's been in place for a fair number of years. It relates to the MMU insurance that was taken out when we were all part of the county councils back in the day. That company went into liquidation, and there is a risk that there may be claims dating back to that point. To date, we have had no claims and we have no indication of any claims, but that at this moment in time still remains an active possibility, although not necessarily predicted one. Finally, I wanted to just say what happens next. Well, currently the accounts are being audited by Grant Thornton. They are there to ensure that when we present the final accounts to you in September, that they are as good as they can be and that we haven't missed anything. But also we work in partnership with them because they are exposed to accounts from other fire authorities, other local authorities, etc., and that they can bring best practice to it. So if there's anything that they think we can put into the accounts that will enhance them or help readers to understand, we will bring that back to you again in September. Other than that, members, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alan and Wendy. I've got one indication from Councillor James Nicholas. Is there anybody else? Okay, proceed to Councillor James Nicholas. James.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much indeed for that. All those explanations. But my question is, it relates to page 20 and the total usable reserves. So if you're saying we've got £21.5 million in reserves, what is the, can you tell me what the suggested level of reserves is that we should be holding? What's the minimum amount that we should be holding?
Okay, if I explain that, we have two types of reserves. We have a general reserve and we have earmarked reserves. Earmarked reserves are money set aside for specific reasons that you as members have agreed to set money aside for. There are no limits, minimum or maximum, for those particular reserves. The general fund, or the general reserve, is there for emergency purposes and to deal with any unexpected situations which require urgent funding. The recommendation for that, as set out in our reserve strategy, which we approved back in February, is that it should be circa 5% of our budget. And at the moment, that's where we are keeping our general reserves of around £2.2 million. Does that help, Councillor?
Okay, well, so I'm confused. So you're saying should be about 2.2 million, but we've got 20 odd million. So
no, 2.2 is the general reserve, and that's the minimum we should be able to keep. But the
rest is earmarked reserve.
The other are earmarked reserves, and they're at our discretion.
Okay, right. Okay, yep, that's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I believe we're able to note the draft statement of accounts. The Fire Authority will consider the final accounts later this year. I believe that we can move to the next item, but I'll pause for 10 seconds in case any member disagrees. Please indicate it if you wish to speak, or if you're on the phone, please speak up and I'll invite you to speak. Just pause for 10 seconds. Thank you. Let's move on to the next item then. Move to item 3, Annual Governance Statement 2019-20. You find these on pages 89 to 100 inclusive. Andrew Ledbetter will present this item. Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Harris. So there's a legal requirement to produce an annual governance statement. And I think you'll probably see things in there that you recognise from some of the other meetings and planning days that you'll have been to. But unless you're on Governance and Constitution Committee, there'll be some detail in there that you won't have seen before. If you just look at pages 92 to 98, we rely on, or we use this SIP for good governance, delivering good governance framework. And what that gives us, it gives us some principles in which to measure things against. And we gather evidence, we satisfy ourselves and members about our governance performance. And we also get help from the likes of MIAA, the internal auditors. And therefore we can produce, and we regularly update our evidence against these principles. I suppose that bit of the document will change somewhat, but not massively each year, but it will be updated. The bit of the document that does change every year is towards the end. And if you go to page 98, we tend to include a couple of areas that we think we need to keep an eye on during the year or do some work on during the year. So for last year, we had financial sustainability, people and collaborations, and there's brief updates in there. And again, as I said earlier, there'll be things in there that you will recognise. So you'll know that we have a people strategy now. On the people side, you know that we've looked at core values and we've adopted some new core values. You'll have heard today from Anne-Marie Harrop that we've been doing some work on collaborations involving our internal auditors and doing some work of our own. So we've made progress in that area. The bit in there that might be a little bit different to what you've listened to before is Wendy has included some information about this work on financial sustainability. I can't say the word today. And there's a reference to this priority-based budgeting. So we've approached the way that we deal with our budgets in a different way in the last 12 months. We need now to go through the same process again, and it's getting us better and better at judging our performance, making sure the budgets are aligned to the right spend, the right areas of spend. So I think those areas we've covered off pretty well in the last 12 months. And there's still a bit of work to do on collaborations, which is why that's been rolled forward to this year's actions. Couple of things obvious, really obvious, is coronavirus is going to be a feature of most organisations' concerns over the next 12 months or probably a bit longer. So we've put down in the coronavirus, we've seen some, what I would say, very impressively low levels of sickness. The impact on the organisation has been incredibly low, given the way that we've met the challenges. But we know there's a lot ahead of us now. We've got a recovery plan that's been prepared now by Gus O'Rourke and others. And we now need to start thinking about what the medium-term financial plan arrangements will be, because the financial scenario now is very, very unclear. It's probably always unclear, but it's very, very unclear, it seems to me now. So that's one of our big challenges going forward. Perhaps not the next financial year, but certainly beyond that, when we try and understand what the impact of coronavirus has been. We've included in there as well nationally led change. You won't have missed out on the fact that with Grenfell, the Manchester Arena bombing, lots of different things will have an impact on the way that fire services operate in the future. And I think it's right that over this 12 months, we keep a close eye on that. It will have an impact on the way that we operate, and it will mean that the senior team will need to keep a close eye on it to make sure we've got resources in the right places. We've still got work to do on collaboration, which is why I've included it again. But I think we're starting to get into a place where we'll be able to give comfort to ourselves and members about some of the things that we've delivered through those collaborative arrangements. Unsurprisingly, lots of those things feed into other areas of the business. So when we respond to the HMI about the way that we've tackled certain things since they inspected us in 2018, these things will be a feature. So that's all I need to say. If you've got questions, Wendy, myself, Mark, whoever, will do our best to answer any of them.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Have any members indicated they wish to speak? Sounds like a big no again. Okay.
Councillor Lewis was typing, but nothing's come up.
Well, let's just give it a minute or so.
Sorry about that.
I've got you indicating, but it's the way it's typed out. Okay. Got a question?
Sorry about that. I'm getting used to using a laptop, having used an iPad with a touch screen. So when I touch the screen, it doesn't work.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just on the point of collaborations. I mean, I am aware of greater collaboration taking place with regard to some of the deliberate fires. But is this a separate kind of collaboration? Are we talking about the administration purely here, or are we talking about real collaboration between the police, the fire service, in terms of the various things that they attend together?
Okay, so I'm happy to answer that. So it's collaboration in the round really that we're looking at. So when we were inspected, the HMI said that we need to look certainly across some of the areas of collaboration. They didn't look at everything clearly because they only had a limited amount of time when they were with us. But what we want to do is start at the top. So if you like, the bigger, broader collaborations, the ones that have the most impact, such as Blue Light Collaboration, Northwest Fire Control, fire the Insurance Consortium, FRIC, all those larger, more significant collaborations. We've started looking at those, and we've been picking bits and pieces of those to look at, and looking at some of them, the totality of some of them. We will work our way through some of the other areas of the business as well. And already the one area of the business where Nick Evans is focused, they already have a partnership document that they use. So different people will have a different view of what a collaboration is. What we're trying to do at the moment is look at anything where we're working in partnership, in collaboration, even contractually with another public body in particular, or doing something that's a little bit different to what others are doing, and trying to make sure that we can demonstrate that it's given us value for money, that it's delivering what we set out to deliver in the first place. And it's quite hard to do that sometimes when these things have been in place for a while. But the intention is to work through them slowly but surely, so that we get to a point where if there's something that's happening that's not delivering what we expected, we can at least tweak it, change it, improve it, or stop it. And we have had occasions recently where we've stopped a collaboration. So, sometimes they don't always work.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Andrew, of a meeting that I had with the station manager and the sergeant for our area, police sergeant for our area, and local councillors, where we were trying to tackle some of the issues with the deliberate fires that were occurring. The two councillors affected most are myself in Over and Councillor Pardo in Wharton. And I just wondered whether the sort of funding that is available for things like that, will that automatically go through the UPG, or is there going to be a future where we can actually set aside money from the fire authority to work in that kind of collaboration?
I think so we're already doing plenty of work on that front, aren't we? And I suppose it depends, where we need to focus and how much funding we can find for the work. I'm not sure that necessarily sits with the UPG, because it sounds like a long-term thing. Sometimes the UPG things are specific, targeted. So I think the best way really is to raise that with us, and we can look at that and see whether we can draw in any funding, or whether we can divert resources from somewhere else. So perhaps the best thing is to have a chat with the likes of Nick Evans.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Have you got any other questions?
James has asked a question about which collaboration was stopped. We had a project with the constabulary related to the drone. So these drones that we use to hover above fires or incidents to give us a better picture of the overall arrangement on scene. It didn't work. We had a grown-up conversation. It stopped, and that's the easiest one for me to refer to because it's quite recent.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any others? No one wishes to ask anything further? Okay. Okay. I believe we're able to note the annual governance statements. The Fire Authority will consider the final accounts and this annual governance statement later this year. I believe that concludes the business for today. However, if you wish to speak, please indicate, or if you're on the phone, please speak up. I'll give you the standard 10 seconds to elapse for any indication. Okay. Okay, that's approved. And that concludes the business for today. Thank you for your attendance, and I wish you well for the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye now. Goodbye.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Andrew.